through these wonderful speakers that we've had on, and also through other research, that there are triggers, there are other problems, root problems that causes people to pick up this inanimate object called the gun and destroy, murder lives of innocent people. We are grateful that we have started this, because this really has opened up our eyes to many different wonderful angles, what I call best practices that are out there on the local level, on the grassroots level, and on the state level. It depends on who we're addressing. And when we're talking about the state or the city level, we're talking about our law enforcement officers who have come on, who have the same concerns that we do and are looking for a resolve, and sharing how they played a role in bringing some sort of solution in reducing crime in America. It has not anything to do with putting people in the prison system, but how do we keep the people out of the prison system and begin to rehabilitate through not only intervention, but also prevention. So we've had a lot of wonderful speakers on. Today, I have another of our speakers who happens to be a very close dear friend of mine. And he was here in Washington, D.C., but now he resides in California. And his brother, dear brother, colleague, friend, his name is Lonnie Poindexter. And I just want to read just a brief points about his bio, so you can get a little gist of who he is and what he thinks and how his career has manifested itself to play a critical role and be a wonderful presenter today on this particular topic, stopping violence. Lonnie Poindexter has over 25 years of successful management, sales, marketing experiences, have worked with Silicon Valley startups and tech sector industry leaders in California. Today, as a Washington, D.C. correspondent, he's covered current events in the nation's capital concerning public policy and faith-based community. Lonnie hosted a national Christian political radio show called The Lion Chaser. The show broadcast on Urban Family Communications, which was a ministry outreach of America's Family Radio, one of the largest Christian radio networks in the nation. Lonnie was also a co-host for GLC TV's Light of the Southwest show, a national television program on God's Learning Channel in Odessa, Midland, Texas. Lonnie is the founder and president of the Lion Chaser Network, an association of faith-based organizations and activists, clergy mobilized to speak on issues of today that negatively impacts our nation. The Lion Chasers Network addresses the intersection of faith and policy in America. LCN's position is that there's no line of demarcation between morality and governance. Thank you, my dear brother Lonnie, for coming on. It's a great pleasure to see you. We haven't seen each other's face in a while now, but we look forward for you coming back. I look forward to going over there to seeing you again. We just want to welcome you. And actually, I've asked him to speak on a topic, as you can see, to address building the content of character as a road to reducing crime and violence in America. Welcome, my brother. How are you?
Thank you so much, my brother. I am well. I am truly honored to be invited to come on to your platform and discuss things that are near and dear to you and me both. And I'm sure all of the those that are watching and listening in to the program. It is truly an honor. And I try to pinch myself every so often to remind myself it's not a dream. This is real, that God took little old me, a bushy head kid from Southern California, and said, I want you to go do the work of the gospel, but I want you to do it in a unique way. And I said, okay. Once I understood what he was saying, he had to get my attention first. And then I said, okay. And then this wonderful thing took place where I get a chance to meet and interact with individuals that I consider the real deal, who I consider lion chasers. And the term lion chasers is taken from scripture. What is it? Was it First or Second Chronicles 11:22, where Benaiah, one of David's mighty men, went one-on-one with a lion in a pit on a snowy day and prevailed. He walked out the pit, the lion did not. So it's about identifying people that have that same kind of spirit, because it takes a certain amount of boldness today to speak truth to power in the times that we're in. I'm sure you're aware of that, Brother Oliver, and those that are watching in today, that we're in some interesting times, as my old pastor would say, and it requires courage. And that courage can come from on high, because when you truly look at what's going on, it can be disheartening. It can be pretty scary, especially when you see the events that are taking place today, as it relates to what you mentioned prior, guns, and in more particular, what people are doing with guns, and just the general. My dad used to say, it's just people have a lack of understanding or common sense. And so that's what we see today. So people of faith in the faith-based community must be active. We must be politically active, not sitting on the sidelines with our bags packed waiting for Jesus to come back. We must be active in every facet of society, and we can right this ship until Christ's triumphant return. There's something I want to read, because I was thinking about what you tasked me with, but what came to mind is what's taking place in the news, in particular the incident that took place in Memphis, Tennessee, with a young man who interacted with police and lost his life. And I wrote some things down, and I posted it in social media. I want to read it to you all here today, and then I'm going to comment on it, and then look forward to your response as well. Let me read this. Back in the 60s and 70s, I was taught by my dad how to successfully navigate interaction with law enforcement. Dad, who was born in the South, Mississippi to be specific, he called it critical thinking. My point being, Dad said, you don't know who is on the other side of that badge. Could be a good cop, or it could be a bad cop, or just a cop having a bad day. He said, you control that interaction, son, by what you say, how you act, and what you do. Dad said, you can't argue or mouth off and tussle with anyone who has the legal right to shoot you if they deem it appropriate. And you certainly can't run or be intoxicated. You must comply, or you put yourself at extreme risk. Now, this is a Black man born in the South, speaking of my father, at a time in history where it was very difficult to walk the walk of life and of faith if you happen to have what I call the darker paint job. So he has unique wisdom based on his time in the South, and then his mother moving him to California, and then hence going down the road. My dad met my mom when he was of age. They got married. They're still married today, 69 years, and still with us. And he's 91 years old. My mom is 90. So he had a unique perspective. So he was instilling in me critical thinking. Let me read on. We don't yet fully know what and all that took place, so I am not accusing the young man. I also wonder about the 5 law enforcement officers involved and how they were raised by their dads. Key point there. given the actions that they took. I'm just saying young Black men must use critical thinking when they deal with law enforcement, given our history of tension with law enforcement in this nation. Critical thinking. Let me read on. A truly sad outcome for this young man and his family. I am also truly sad to see the ambulance chasers like Sharpton and Crump, who are circling the emotional carnage like vultures looking for a payday, exploiting the tragic incident with their false narrative and the wokesters. I grew up in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s, and I avoided or mitigated negative interactions with law enforcement largely because I applied the critical thinking taught to me by my dad. My dad was and is the bull elephant that kept me safe because he taught me well. And then my final point is, where are the bull elephants? So we think about crime and gun violence. What is the cause? And then therefore, what is the solution? I would submit the cause is the absence of a patriarchal environment of fathers being vested in and of their families and their children, and specifically male interaction with their sons, daughters as well for that matter, but I'm focusing on the sons today. What we're seeing in society is a breakdown of the traditional family. Dads just aren't home anymore like they used to be. Now, this is systemic across the population, but it's epic within the community of folks who look like us. It's epic. Over 70+% of Black households today are single parent, typically female head of household. Now, I've got nothing against moms. I had and have a great mother. She instilled wonderful things in me. But what kept me on the right path was the firm hand of a man who cared about me enough to make me do what was right, to make me get a perspective of what really matters and how to conduct myself in a way that I could not only survive living in this nation, but prosper in this nation. It was my dad. I speak of them often. Folks laugh at me, say, "You're really crazy about your dad." I say, "Yeah, I am. He's my hero." Back in grade school, we had to write a report. I believe it was in the 7th grade. And I had to write a report about who is my hero. And, you know, all the different individuals came to mind: Superman, Batman, sports greats, you know, football, basketball, whatever. But the one person that kept ringing up in my spirit was my father. So that's what I wrote about. And so I see an absence of traditional fatherhood in the Black community today. And we're suffering because of it. When I think of this young man, and it's tragic what happened to him there in Memphis, I wonder, what was his relationship with his father? Was his father actively involved? Did his father teach him critical thinking to allow him to navigate the pitfalls that are out there, and become successful, not only to survive, but to become successful? I often think about the 5 law enforcement officers and their dealings with this young man. Was their fathers involved in their lives? You would see from some of the actions, and we don't know everything, and it's going to come out, all the details. We just see the video. What interactions did they have with their father? I would submit, given the data that's out there, 70+% of those 5 policemen probably did not have a dad actively involved in their life. But that's a topic for another show, another segment. So that's what came to mind for me, because here's what happens. Now, let's go to scripture. Give me a minute here to pull it up. Because scripture tells us a lot about the environment that we're in today. And here's something that I pulled up. Fatherhood was one of the first responsibilities God gave to men. Fatherhood was one of the first jobs God gave men. Immediately after creating Adam and Eve, God commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. One of his primary purposes for marriage was offspring who would fill the earth in God's praise and glory. However, providing, I'm going to stop there. Let me go to some of the bullet points. Here's some of the verses that came up. A father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. And that's Psalms 103:13. Here's Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline instructions of the Lord. Here's Proverbs 20:7. Well, let me read on. Let's go to Colossians. Colossians 3:21. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. And here's Proverbs 4:1-9. Hear, O sons, a father's instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight, for I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and live. Get wisdom and get insight. Do not forget, and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. There's several others, but I'm just making a point here. I think you all get what I'm saying. The importance of fathers. We exist today in a society, and in my opinion, a government apparatus that has taken the authority and place that men have traditionally had out of the family. And I think we're suffering because of it. The solution to this is very simple. Put patriarchy back where it needs to be, where men can truly fulfill all that God has called them to do. We will repair our society when men stand up. There's a group of men in Chicago, and the name of them escapes me. I think they were just dads that got together, nothing formal. But if you know about the number of incidents that take place in Chicago with gun warfare, or warfare with guns. And it's just, I think it was like 700 murders last year, something like that. It's a ridiculous number. So a group of men there in inner city Chicago, South Side, that had enough because of all the foolishness that was taking place. And the foolishness basically is just unsupervised bands or gangs of unsupervised male youth running amok. And so these men, these are dads, military veterans, blue collar workers, professionals across the whole gamut, who got together and decided to patrol the streets in and around the school where their children attended. You want to know what happened? The gang violence ceased because a handful of men stood up and said enough is enough, and were allowed to do so. There's a pastor, Corey Brooks, in the South Side of Chicago, who has been beating the drum for this type of activity by men to stand up. And he was just awarded a multi-million-dollar grant for his Project Hood, which is part of his organization that he's using to reinstill the values that are near and dear. And quite frankly, is what allowed us who happen to have the darker paint job to not only survive slavery and second-class citizenship and Jim Crow, but prosper in spite of. And that was the men standing up. So I don't want to go too much longer, given so much time, but that's how I see where we are today and what we need. It's very simple. It's not going to be government that's going to solve this problem. In fact, they exacerbate the problem. I'll just mention this. Government in the mid-1960s, at the implementation of the entitlement programs, voting rights and so forth, instilled the welfare programs that ended up hamstringing the Black community. Second thing that took place was in 1973 with abortion, but that's a topic for another show. So it's very simple. It's got to come from us, and it has to emanate from the church. So those are my final comments. Any questions or feedback that you have for me, I welcome.
Well, thank you. What you shared doesn't take a rocket scientist to implement something like this. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to implement it, but it takes the power of a rocket scientist to break through the quagmire of things that have prevented fathers to be accounted for in our nation. And I like how you job, and it's true, Lonnie, we're looking at this from different angles. Violence in general can be categorized because we have the Black community, Hispanic community, we have those communities, we have a white community, we have all kinds of communities that are suffering violence and that are victims of guns. So as we look at each one of them, they have their unique nuance, if you were, unique, what I call unique triggers. Now, across the board, no matter what community you are, fathers play a very critical role. But what you're saying to us now, by percentage, there's a higher percentage of the Black community that is lacking the fathers being extremely present in the lives of their children. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the angles for that particular community. That's one of the angles that is very important too. And I'm really happy that you're sharing about your father, because, people are not used to men of color, especially of African American descent, talking about their fathers. It's almost an anomaly, but I don't think it's an anomaly. I think it's always kind of been a fact. However, there are other extenuating circumstances that has played a critical role, and I think you alluded to some of those, of taking the father out of the family and not seeing it as a priority to help in the reduction of the ill behaviors of those young boys and now these young girls out in the street. So I'm really happy. I had a very, very powerful relationship with my father. He was in my life from the beginning to the end. He was an intricate person like your dad was in my life. So I don't talk about it much, but he did. He played a critical role in my life, and he too was my hero. Great man. I loved him. Jim Oliver. And so this is very important. I do remember my dad, two things My dad here in Washington, D.C. in the gentrification process went to his colleagues, and said, why don't we men get together and buy, these brownstones that are being gentrified and everything else, and why don't we buy them? And then our sons and daughters out in the street, when they see us coming out, they see a role model.
Mm-hmm.
But his feedback was disappointing. I don't want to go there. They couldn't do it. But the last thing, my father was invited to speak right after the Million Man March. He was invited to a church to be a speaker to follow up on what he thought of that particular program event. So he said the last thing, what he said to me and my mom on several occasions. He said, if the church that housed the most powerful spirit, bringing the Spirit of God in the four walls of that church that is so powerful, manifested in those communities that it is in, release it to the communities that it is in.
Yes.
He said it would have solved God's problem a long time ago. He went home, he changed his clothes, he went to the store to buy a newspaper, and as they were handing him his newspaper, his change, he literally keeled over backwards and had a heart attack and died instantly. That was his last words. That was my father's last words. So it's conducive of what you're saying. It will take the church. The church is the moral compass for us, but also the church has to take responsibility, understanding the needs of the fathers to begin to stand up. And it is true. So I want to thank you for your presentation. I want to open it up for those who would like to share something on what Rolani Poindexter, my dear friend, has shared with us. It's another angle that we are discussing in order to deal with the violence in America. And as I always say, a gun is just an inanimate object, but it takes someone to pick it up. What triggers people to pick that gun up and causes havoc and take the lives of innocent people? So again, my brother, Lonnie, it's good to see you. And now that we are reconnected, we're going to stay in touch because we really need to discuss some things. The floor is open to anyone who would like to share in regards to our speaker. Do I see a hand up?
Not yet. People are gathering their thoughts, I think.
Okay, Dr. Madeline, she raised her hand. I saw it. All right, my dear.
Greetings. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Oliver. I always say thank you for sharing your platform, and you always have illustrious speakers on to enlighten us. Reverend or Mr. Poindexter, I thank you so much for your presentation, and it reminded me of my father. My father was continuously in my life, even though I had a stepfather. So they were able to father me and parent me together, which was powerful because I had two fathers. And it reminds me of my father was my first date. And from that first date, I was taught how a man should treat me, how a man should respect me, how a man should speak to me. Yes. So in that process and in my relationships, if you didn't measure up to my father and my four brothers, then it wasn't going anywhere. So you're absolutely right. A man's tone, a man's voice in the house is powerful and pivotal, especially to a young man, a young person between the ages of 9 and 18. And they have been taken away from the house. They have been taken away from the home. And in that, I don't even think it's consciously, but subconsciously, our young Black men are angry. We've seen it play out in this incident with in Memphis. There's no way they could have beat that young man like that if they were not angry about something. They kicked him in his face, they held his arms, and they just beat him. They just beat him until they got tired. So in that process, you know, we pick up the pieces and we keep moving forward, but that energy, it comes out, it manifests in some way if it's not correctly dealt with. So as we're, you know, approaching these, as we're experiencing these encounters, we never want them to become our norm, but they're happening so often. It's almost like society has accepted it or expected it. So that mindset, even with that mindset, it has to change. The church is the moral compass, but what does the church look like now? You know, so much has changed, and so much pain has been suppressed. I think now we're seeing the manifestation of the pain and the anger and the hurt. So to get to the core, to get to the root, I've been saying it for 20 years. Police officers not only need to have a psychological evaluation when they're hired, but every 6 months because of the trauma they experience. And I pray that they really monitor that and really begin to look at that. When we're talking about that, our society, Mr. Poindexter, you brought it out. When the discipline came out of the household, that was another problem. That was another turning point, because people became afraid to discipline their children. I was never afraid to discipline mine. Clink, clink, lock me up, because you're not going to disrespect my home. You're not going to disrespect me as your mother. So it's so many things, it's so many small things. And the Bible reminds us it's the small foxes that spoil the vine. It's so many small things that has happened in our community that has been ignored, swept up under the rug. And some parents, I'm a parent educator, some parents haven't been properly taught how to parent. When you have a 16-year-old that has a child, they're only 16. So what do they really know? Their mother might be only 32. So if that 32-year-old grandmother didn't receive the tools that she needed to parent the 16-year-old, how does the 16-year-old parent her child? So we see this cycle. We see, you know, we see things that has happened. This is the worst I've ever seen it in my lifetime. I have a 90, I think she's 96, a 96-year-old aunt. And she says this is the worst she's seen it in her lifetime. So as we're having these experiences, Reverend Oliver, like you said, how do we correct it? How do we get to the core? You know, it's easy. It would be easier to start in the schools. I say it all the time, in the school, in the daycares, in the schools, in boys and girls clubs, to introduce the young men, the young women and men to something different, that as they continue their path, they're introduced to critical thinking skills. They're introduced to pausing their emotions. They're introduced to, you know, reflecting on the situation and not just acting out immediately. But what do we do about the guys that's already on the street, that's full with, number one, self-hatred? There's no way those black men could have beat that black guy without hating themselves. I don't care what kind of uniform you put on. It doesn't matter. For you to be able to consciously, it was no different than a gang initiation. It was no different, but yet you hide behind the badge. How do we clean these things up? How do we now introduce critical thinking to those between the ages of 18 and 24 to say, harness your emotions and do a self-reflection on what you're actually feeling? How do we teach them how to have empathy? How do we make them understand that that gun does not give you any authority or power? Because once you pull that trigger, the enemy leaves you. See, the enemy sets you up to pull the trigger, but once you pull the trigger, the enemy leaves and you're standing there with the responsibility of your actions. And a lot of times they don't understand what happened. They look at what happened because they've seen it on TV or they've seen it in some type of game, but they don't understand the real result. They don't understand the real impact. Not only do they have on the family of the person that they're killed, but their family, because this thing is two-sided. It's not just the victim, it's the victimizer, because now you're bringing a whole family or the whole community into your actions. So as we move forward, again, Mr. Poindexter, I think critical thinking is major. It's major. My father used to tell us behind every action is consequences. And we knew we had the consequences of our father. We knew if our mother said, you know what, I'm gonna tell your dad, I'd rather her just go ahead and deal with me and tell me what the punishment is or tell me what's gonna happen. But when she said, wait till your father get home, that took it to a whole different level. You know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. The fathers are powerful. I seen this clip, and I'm not making the comparison between a human and a dog, but this clip, TikTok or whatever it was, it blew my mind. It was this little puppy Doberman Pinscher. And the mother kept nudging it, trying to get him to eat. And he was just barking, yeah. He was just yapping. The father Doberman came in and he said, woo. That puppy went straight to his bowl and began to eat.
Yes.
And I said, that's the way it's in the family. It's a structure. Yeah, we know God's original plan in order for our life. Yes, we know what happened to the fall, but we've been redeemed by Jesus. We've been redeemed. So in that process, let's see how, as the faith-based community, can usher in those troubled youth before they cross that line. And I don't want to take up all the time, so I'm going to stop right there. But again, Mr. Poindexter, I thank you, Reverend Oliver. You know, I commend you daily, just daily, because you are truly my brother. So for everyone else, continue to be a part of stopping the violence. Continue to see what you can do in your home and in your community. God bless you all.
Amen.
Bless you. Well, I want to have my brother come on in a minute, Daryl, Reverend Franklin, and then you can respond, Brother Poindexter. But it's interesting because we had last week, and thank you, Dr. Alexander. You know, anyway, I just let you know, she's my ace buku. You know that. I love her. But anyway, last week we had Dr. Watson on. Watts. And Watts is a pastor, and he shared how he got a whole bunch of boys, put them under his wing, dares to take them to the mall. And Poindexter, you know what happened in the mall. You can just imagine. I don't have to go there. Yeah. You know, they wreaked havoc. They did all kind of stuff. But he brought them back to the mall. And he gathered them. He has a mother, he has a wife and family, and they watch. To make a long story short, because he decided to be consistent in this surrogate fathership, those boys, some of them went and got their own wives. They have their own family. They changed, and they were in that age range, Dr. Madeline, that you were talking about, correct? Yeah. So there's hope if there's proper intervention. Amen. I want to thank you, Reverend. Thank you. That was very powerful, Dr. Madeline. Reverend Franklin, welcome.
Thank you so much, Reverend Oliver. And thank you, Reverend Poindexter, for your wonderful insights and your experience and your sharing. And Dr. Alexander, thank you so much. I just really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation and have this venue sponsored by UPF, where we can really talk about what are the real circumstances that's going to lead towards the path of healing of this phenomenon, which is occurring in our culture today. And I really appreciate Reverend Poindexter pointing out how it is so huge. It is so huge that the church serve as the moral authority, to reclaim its moral authority, to be able to be the initiator of this change that's going to empower our ability to restore our communication with each other. It takes God to be the center of everything that we do. God has to be implemented in everything. Otherwise, it is so easy and it's so vulnerable for a culture as well as a society to miss tackling and addressing the true issues that are behind these dysfunctional circumstances in which we are being plagued with. And I say that because the whole idea is that we lost our ability to be able to be honest and truthful with each other. And with that loss, within there is a slowly, a inability, as Reverend Poindexter said, our inability to critically think. We are, without that, there's no foundation for us to utilize self-control, to be able to come to the place where we are acting in accordance with our true consciousness, with our true original mind. That comes from us being able to have this spiritual interaction with the church being part of the healing process, so that we can act in a functional manner and the church, as you know, Reverend Poindexter says, the church no longer cannot allow itself to just stay within its church community or its church confinement. It has to be interjected in every single phase of our society, because otherwise everything and all solutions are coming from our limited understanding as man. Mm-hmm. And for us to go beyond our limitations of looking at myself from my own point of view, I will not have the faith or the courage to do what is right. But with God, within, there is a possibility to go beyond ourselves. And so those are the takeaways that I get from that. And thank you so much, everybody.
Brother Poindexter, did you want to share? Anyone else has anything else that they want to bring? You can want to respond to that. Oh, Wayne. Yes, welcome, Wayne.
Yes, wonderful presentation, Mr. Poindexter. I want to bring up a book written called The Boy Crisis, and it's written by Warren Farrell and John Gray. And I'll just hold it up a little bit, see if you can see it.
Yeah, we see it. Thank you. Excellent.
And I just started reading it, so I can't tell all the content on it, but the authors point out that statistics that we're well aware of, more boys are ending up in prison. More boys, 6-to-1 right now with suicide than girls. More girls are graduating from college. More girls are getting higher paid jobs in the working world, higher positions. And they're looking at that and calling it the boy crisis. And I'm not sure if it's the feminist movement that affected it, but absolutely it's connected to a lack of fatherhood. But there's also not an appreciation for boys compared to girls these days, and I'm not sure the answer for that. this book may have some very good insights into it. So I bring this up just not as someone knowledgeable of it, but as a resource that we can look into this a little bit deeper at a different angle. So that's my comment on that.
That's true. Anyone else like to, Brother Poindexter, do you wanted to comment on the
Yes,
statements that were made?
yes. First of all, to everyone in their comments, dead on point. Dr. Madeline, you had me jumping up and down doing the Kojic dance based on your comments. And I'm not even Kojic, but I can dance like they can. And it just really hit home. I do a lot of counseling. Now, I'm not a counselor by profession, and I'm not a pastor for those that are listening in today, but that's who I hang out with. I don't, it's a God thing. God did that. 98% of who I hang out with are clergy. I have a passion for clergy, and I call myself the chief edifier of clergy. But one thing I wanted to point out was quickly, the organization that I'm doing a lot of work with right now is an organization called EBLM, and it stands for Every Black Life Matters. And it's an organization that was created to take the nomenclature from the BLM movement and confront them on core issues as it relates to the Black community. And first and foremost is the abortion issue, because the BLM leadership is pro-abortion. But also the two founders, Kevin McGary and Neil Mammon. Kevin McGary has written this phenomenal book that can begin to peel back the layers of the onion as to the real agenda associated with BLM and the origins of so-called white supremacy and racism in America. And it traces back, of all people, to a anti-God villain in one Dr. Charles Darwin. And I had no idea, and I thought I was pretty knowledgeable, but Kevin has written this book. I just wanted to point it out, bring it up for folks. You can get it at Amazon, but it's called Woke Up. Woke Up. And it's finally putting an axe to the taproot of white supremacy and racism in America. And all the tangled web leads all the way back to Dr. Charles Darwin and Karl Marx and all these other individuals who were all anti-God, who were raised Christian, but then fell to the manipulations of Charles Darwin. And then that set the framework for the justification for some of the foolishness we saw taking place in America at its forming, and going back even to Europe. So phenomenal book, and it'll really outline, and it delves into the things that we're talking about today about what's happening in the Black community, all communities for that matter, but in particular, the Black community. And it's pulling the paternal influence the Black community has always had. I mean, even after slavery and during Reconstruction, what did those Black fathers do that were formerly slaves and now they're free? They went and found their children and they found their wives and they reunited with them. That's the story of Frederick Douglass, if you want to look up all of his history. And so that's what they did. And so fathers have always been strong in the Black community up until the mid-1960s and the things that we're talking about today that took place. So I just wanted to comment on that. And you can go to everyblm.com, everyblm.com to learn more information about the work I'm doing there. And I appreciate, Brother Oliver, you allow me to be on the program.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, thank you. It's true. They say that the Black community, the fathers were taken out of the home, especially during the welfare era. And I do remember being over some friend's house, and the mother was a single mother, and I do remember distinctly. I had no idea what I was seeing, but now I remember. The mother had a live-in boyfriend, if you will. He would come over, and but it's interesting. He was an influence in our house. in the house. However, there was at that time social workers would come to the home to check the closet to make sure that there was no man's clothes in the woman's closet.
Mhm.
You see, and if you did, you lose your check, you lose your money. You know, so that I don't think people took Patrick Moynihan's prophetic.
Yes.
He had a prophetic vision, not a vision, but calculation, if you will, that the way this welfare system is going, that we would destroy the Black family and taking the men out of the home. And this is written by Patrick Moynihan. Read his work, and it did. We see that, and I like what you brought up. It's true that a lot of the even after slavery, the fathers went to find their families, and there's a lot of beautiful stories of these Black fathers going, looking, and searching for their families, sometimes walking distance of 50 or 30 miles on the weekend, 30 or 40 miles, just to go visit his family and then go back to his thing. There's a lot of stories out there that are like that we need. It changes the paradigm of thought. My dad used to say this, Lonnie. He says, all these years we hear this, back then in the 70s, it was 50% of Black fathers are not in the home or single parent family. You hear it on the news consistently. So it's subliminally affecting your outlook of things, and the outlook and everything else. So my father used to say, why don't the journalists, the newscaster go on the news every week and every day, 50% that don't, but let's look at the 50% that do.
Yes.
And let's interview them on a weekly basis. What about the 50% that do? They would have a cataclysmic effect on the community, but they don't do that. So as we are looking at, this topic of family, and it goes back to content of character, because within a construct of the family is where we develop and cultivate our moral construct as children that helps reduce crime behaviors, and if you do a little crime, you're more conscience stricken. Some of these kids are not conscience stricken because of I think Dr. Madeline said, if you're a 16-year-old and you're sick and you turn 32, you have a 16-year-old, where's the family moral construct being passed on to one child, to one family there? So you become more insensitive to different, what's right or wrong, So you have kids out here now that are almost desensitized to goodness, because they didn't have that, the power of the family, which is where we learn our socialization skills, and most importantly, where we learn our love skills, our loving skills, and we receive love. And that's what the world in a large. So happen we're talking about the Black community, but it's all the communities. Because we're all God's children. The family construct is the building block for a great society. It is transcending race, culture, and religion. Just so happen, even as I always say, if people outside of America or even inside of America, when they think of crime, they think of violence, usually their mind first goes to which community? The community. As my brother said, the ones who are, what do you call it? Painting the
Darker paint job.
The darker paint job, that kind of thing. But we're all affected. Yeah. You see all sorts of violence going on in all the communities that we needs to be healed. We are coming to the close. I want to thank you. I want to give you again, if anybody has a burning desire, please Who?
I gotta get a paper towel.
Okay,
I would, Reverend Oliver.
okay, thank you.
Just quickly, yes, this is a great book here too. I just got it a while back, written 1996, but it's Ken Canfield, and he has just marvelous things in here about the value of being a dad on site. It's how dads can shape the destiny of America. Written 1996, he was ahead of his time, I'd say, but I read the book that Wayne has as well, and very powerful. Even one of the problem is with males in school, it's difficult for them. They're not able to sit and do nothing for a long time as much as females. So they sit there and they're dancing, they get trapped and they get really, out of whack with that. So even from the very beginning, it's difficult. But I'd have to say that no matter where men are, if they're in prison, they're divorced, they still can take care of their sons. They have visitation for boys that come to the prison with families, and dads can come to the home and visit. So they have no excuse. So, but they don't know they're important. They don't know they're needed, I think, so that's a tough spot there for them. So anyway, thank you for your work. And I want to encourage you. Thank you.
That's true. That's a great book. It's true that fathers play a very critical role. There was actually VJ Smith was on as being a conclusion. He had a program where he was his major focus was teaching young men coming out of the prison system to become dads, to retake their fatherhood positions, and showing them how to do that. It was a very successful program. And guess what? It reduced the recidivism rates in this program. However, it lost its funding. They didn't want to refund it, So that's another show in itself. But I want to thank you, Brother Lonnie. Man, it's always good to talk with you. Lonnie and I, when he was here in DC, we get together, we have deep conversations. We go to different programs together, and he's also traveled to Korea with us. So he's a jewel. Lonnie, I meant to tell you, after a long time, for some reason, I took these out and I wore them to this event. You remember these?
Yes. Yes, I did.
I wore them. I never wore them for a long time, but yesterday I went to an event and I had these, I needed this. And I took them out and I wore them. So I kept them to show you. Everybody, Lonnie gave them to me as a gift a long time ago. God bless you. Lonnie, Brother Lonnie, do you want to share one last word as we close?
Yeah, just quickly, in summation, the bull elephants must stand up. I'm talking about the men, the women historically in our community have done a great job. The men have as well, but the men need to stand up now, understand that it's systemic in the taking away of men's authority within the home and in society as it relates to family. And it's important for the bull elephants. And the term bull elephants, I'll just quickly state this, comes from something that I saw a number of years ago when there was, and you can Google this and find it online. There was a game preserve in Africa, and the game preserve had elephants and all the things that you have at a game preserve in Africa. And what happened was they began to have a problem with the elephants, where the young juvenile male elephants were running amok, and they were terrorizing the other animals. They were killing rhinos, killing other elephants. They were just wreaking havoc. And what happened?
Going into their villages too.
Yes, that's right, and going into the villages. And so the game warden of that game preserve, who had retired, the new game warden came in and said, "We got a problem with these elephants, these male elephants, the young ones. We don't know what to do with them. Can you help us?" And he said pretty much, and I'm giving my version of it. He said, well, where's old Buck? And he said, old Buck. He says, yeah, the patriarchal elephant within that herd. And he said, they said, well, we retired him. We sent him to another game preserve someplace. He says, oh no. He says, go get Buck, bring him back, and reinstall him in that game preserve amongst those other elephants. And they said, well, why would we do this? Just trust me, just do that, and then reach out to me. So they did that, and an amazing thing happened. The young male juvenile elephants that were running amok stopped their behavior. So my point being, all we need is the bull elephants in our community to stand up and help those mothers to be, participate in your children's welfare, obviously, but in the community, do it as well. And as I stated earlier, it all starts with the church. When the pastors stand up and speak truth to power, it energizes the congregation, and he challenges the males in that congregation. It'll give those males in the congregation something to do, and they'll rise up. You want to see more men in your church? Challenge them to do something to change their community. Thank you, Brother Oliver.
Man, thank you very much. Let's give him a hand clap for that very powerful conclusion. I knew you would do a great job. Thank you so much for, coming on. I want to thank everyone for consistently coming on. Those people who are on live, if you have any comments or anything else, please try to contact us anytime. Maybe we should have a contact information, but you can contact me, 202-487-4488. We look forward to listening or hearing from you and your comments. And again, those who have people that you feel that will be an asset to this particular program that we have every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock, please let me know, and we would love to have them on as well. Lonnie, my brother Lonnie, God bless you. It's good to see you. Thank you so much for what you have offered. Thank you
so
much.
Great program.
Daryl,
thank you, everyone.
nice to
Thank
see you
God
again.
bless.
God bless. God bless us
God
one and
bless
all.
everyone. Thank you for a
We
precious
can do
program.
this. We can never give up. Never give up.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Excellent content. Excellent content.
Thank you for
Thank
your work, your words of wisdom.
Great. Dad stand up and granddad stand up as well, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Stand up.
He's standing up. Okay, God bless. Thank you, Lonnie. God bless everyone.
Thank you,
Seriously.
Bless. Take care.
Dr. Madeline, thank you so much.
Yeah.